Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It seemed like an innocent purchase, really a simple, unassuming pillow, from a second-hand store. I needed a new one. Mine was getting flat, losing its shape, and I just couldn't sleep properly anymore. The old one was worn out and lumpy. I had passed second-hand store many times, never really thinking about the items in the window, but that day, something caught my eye. It was a pillow of all things. It was soft, perfectly shaped, and surprisingly comfortable to the touch. I didn't think much of it at the time, but something about it intrigued me. The tag was a little faded, but it didn't seem unusual. No stains or tears, just a pillow. Nothing special about it. I thought it was a bargain, something I could use to replace my old one I bought. And that night, I placed it on my bed, pressing my face into its softness. It was almost too comfortable. It cradled my head perfectly, and the scent of it, faint like dust and old fabric, settled into my mind, lulling me to sleep. The first night I slept deeply, better than I had in weeks. I woke up refreshed, the weight of the pillow supporting my head in ways I hadn't even realized I was missing. There was nothing strange about it. Nothing to indicate that this simple pillow would change everything. But the second night, that's when it started. I had fallen asleep quickly as usual, but then in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, not from noise or movement, but from a feeling, something unsettling, a pressure on my chest. I opened my eyes, but there was nothing unusual in my room. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a pale light over the furniture, and everything seemed normal, but the feeling, this heavy, oppressive sensation, lingered. I tried to brush it off, convinced, it was just the weight of my own imagination. I rolled over, grabbed the pillow, and tucked my head back in, trying to find sleep again. But I didn't. Instead, I drifted into a dream. It wasn't like my usual dreams, fuzzy and fleeting. This one felt too real. In the dream, I was in my bedroom, exactly as it was now, but the air felt thick, charged with something. I couldn't see the pillow. The pillow was there, but it wasn't just a pillow anymore. It was a portal, a presence. The fabric of it seemed to shift and move. And in the middle of it, there was a shape, a face, a woman's face. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, but there was something off about them. Her pupils were too dark, too deep, like endless black holes. I felt like I was drowning in her stare. She smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was unsettling, crooked, like something you'd see in a nightmare. "Why are you here?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, like it came from the corners of the room. But it felt like she was speaking directly into my mind. Tried to speak, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my body frozen. I wanted to run, to scream, but my limbs wouldn't move. And then the dream changed. The walls of the room shifted, the floor cracked open beneath me, and I fell into darkness, unable to stop. Sensed myself. The sensation of falling was endless, until I landed hard with a jolt. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my room. I was in a small, dimly lit space, cold and damp. The walls were closing in on me, and I could hear the sound of something moving in the shadows, but it wasn't until I looked down that I saw the pillow again. It was there in the corner of the room, just lying there. But now the woman was sitting beside it, her face twisted in a way that made my heart race. She was staring directly at me, and as I moved toward her, I could hear her voice again, only this time, it was a whisper in the back of my mind. "You've invited me in," she said. "Now you'll never sleep without me." I jerked awake with a start, gasping for air. The pillow was still beneath my head, but the dream's nightmare ruis, fresh in my mind, vivid, clear. My heart pounded in my chest. As I glanced around the room, it was quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of the woman, no hint of the strange place I had been. It was just my bedroom, as it had always been, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something was wrong. The next night, the dream returned. And the night after that, and the night after that, each time the woman would appear in my dreams, staring at me with those wide, dark eyes, smiling that crooked, unsettling smile. Her presence grew stronger with every night, and I couldn't escape it. The pillow was always there, always at the center of the dream, like it was drawing me in, connecting me to whatever world she came from. I tried to stay awake, I tried to avoid sleep, but the exhaustion was too much. Every time I closed my eyes, I would slip into the same dark space, the same place where the woman waited. Her smile grew wider, more disturbing, until I felt like I was suffocating. The whispers in my mind became louder, until they were all I could hear. I tried to pull away from her, but she always followed me. By the fifth night, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I couldn't remember if I was in my room, or in the dream. Was I awake? Was I asleep? The boundary between the two had dissolved. I began to see the woman, even when I was awake. In reflections in the corner of my eye, her face would appear in the window, or in the shadows of the hallway. I could hear her voice in the silence, her words slipping into my thoughts uninvited. "You brought me here," she whispered in the dead of night, "and now you'll never be alone." I tried to throw the pillow away, tried to get rid of it, but every time I did it, reappeared in the corner of my room, on my bed, beneath my head. When I woke up, I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape her. The woman had taken hold of my life. She was in every dream, in every waking moment, and I realized with horror that I was no longer in control. The pillow wasn't just an object, it was a tether, a connection to something beyond this world, beyond sleep, beyond death. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake her. She was always with me. Now the woman in my dreams, the woman who had come back with me, who shared my sleep, who shared my life. And I don't know how much longer I can stand it before she takes over entirely. At first I didn't think much of it. People have their quirks, right? Little things that make them feel safe, comforted in their own way. I didn't think anything about my new roommate's attachment to her doll, but now I wish I had. Her name was Clara. She moved in a few months ago, right after her old roommate left for another city. We hit it off instantly. Easy conversations, quiet nights, shared meals. She was pleasant, if a bit reserved, but I didn't mind. She was friendly enough, and I figured we'd both peace and privacy of our apartment. But then came the doll. I noticed it on the first night she slept over. It was sitting on the armchair in the corner of the living room, a dusty old thing with porcelain skin and empty glass eyes. Its clothes were tattered, the hair matted and uneven. I didn't say anything. At first it wasn't unusual to see someone attached to a childhood toy, so I figured Clara just liked to keep it around for sentimental reasons. But the next morning it was in her bedroom, placed neatly on her bed. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. Maybe she just wanted it near her when she slept, and I figured it was harmless. That's when the whispers started. It was subtle at first, just a faint sound, barely audible, like the faintest rustling, or a soft, almost imperceptible creak. I chalked it up to the apartment settling, or maybe the wind outside shifting the blinds, but the more it happened, the less certain I started noticing behavior to every night. Without fail, she would set the doll up in her bed before going to sleep. She would arrange it with great care, as if the doll were a real person, tucking it in under the covers. The ritual was always the same shed place, the doll's cold, unblinking eyes toward the wall, as though she didn't want it to see her while she slept. But what struck me most was how whenever I'd walk into her room to check on her, she'd be facing the wall, her body curled up in a ball. I never asked her why she didn't want the doll facing her, but I began to wonder if it was something more than just a superstition. It was like she was afraid of it, even though she refused to sleep without it. The whispers continued, and one night I decided to do something about it. I had gone to bed late, and as usual, I heard the faint murmurs coming from her room. This time, though, I decided to investigate. I tiptoed down the hallway to her door. Careful not to disturb her, the door was slightly ajar, and through the crack I could see her lying in bed, her back facing the doll just like always, but the whispers were louder now. They weren't coming from her, the sound was coming from the doll. The soft, scratchy whispers were emanating from it, like it was speaking in a language I didn't recognize, its mouth unmoving but its presence growing. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I stood there for what felt like forever, too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. My heart pounded in my chest. Pooh. And I wanted to leave, but I couldn't tear myself away. There was something so wrong, so unnatural about the way the doll was positioned on her bed, its lifeless eyes staring directly at me. Suddenly Clara stirred in her sleep. She turned over facing the wall as usual, and the whispers stopped. I left her room quickly, my heart still racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing those faint whispers in my head, replaying over and over again. I tried to shake it off, but I knew deep down that I wasn't just imagining things. There was something wrong with that doll. The next day, I finally asked Clara about it. I had to know. Clara, do you ever? I stopped myself, unsure of how to phrase it. Do you ever hear anything strange at night, like whispers? She didn't look up from her tea, her hands trembling slightly as she set the cup down. What do you mean? She asked, her voice softer than usual. Like sounds voices may be. I don't know, I just keep hearing things, and am not sure if I'm imagining it. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at her tea. Then, after what seemed like too long a pause, she spoke. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The doll, it talks to me. It's always talked to me. I blinked, confused. Wait, what? It talks to? Cut. You? Her eyes were hollow, distant as she looked up at me. It tells me things. It's my only friend. The only one who's always been there. I stared at her, unsure of how to react. Her gaze shifted back to the doll in the corner of the room, as if it had some sort of pull on her. It watches me, she added softly, almost to herself. It watches me when I sleep. It knows things about me, things I've never told anyone. The air in the room grew heavy, like the temperature had dropped by a few degrees. I could see the sweat forming on Clara's brow, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. She was afraid. I felt a strange pang of fear myself. I wanted to tell her that she was imagining things, that the doll was just a doll, a relic of childhood, nothing more, but I couldn't. Something in her voice, the way she spoke about it. I knew she believed it, and a part of me was starting to believe it too. That night, I stayed in my room, trying to push the unease out of my mind. I couldn't sleep, though every time I closed my eyes I could hear the faintest whisper, like the softest rustling of fabric. I convinced myself it was nothing. Just my imagination, just the usual nighttime sounds. But as I lay there in the dark, I swore I heard something else, a soft, slow creak like the bed was shifting. Then, another, the sound of something. I opened my eyes, heart hammering, but the room was still my own bed, my own space. Nothing had changed. I listened again, but the sounds had stopped, except now I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or if it was real. The whispers continued, that night, growing louder. Every time I thought they were gone, they came back. And the next morning, when I went to check on Clara, I found something that made my blood run cold. The doll had moved, its position had shifted, and its eyes were now facing the wall where Clara had been sleeping. It wasn't just the doll that had moved though, it was Clara. She had changed. She was standing in the hallway looking at me with that same empty expression, her eyes distant, her body stiff, as if she were waiting for something. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't her own. You can't take it from me. Her words were cold, detached, like they weren't even coming from her anymore. I stepped back, fear rising in my chest as I realized that Clara wasn't Clara anymore. The doll had taken something from her, it had changed her. And I was afraid that whatever power it had, whatever it had brought into this world, was starting to take hold of me. Clara didn't sleep anymore. She never slept without the doll, and now I don't know if she ever will again. And the worst part, I think the doll is watching me now too. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it, it watches me. I didn't think much of it when I moved into the new apartment. It was an old building, a little run down, but the rent was cheap, and I needed somewhere quick. The apartment itself wasn't much to look at: cracked paint, creaky floors, and that stale smell. Ooh. An old, unused space, but it had a certain charm. I liked the way the light filtered in through the windows in the late afternoon. It felt like a place I could settle into, at least for a while. The first thing I noticed after moving in was the mirror beside my bed. It wasn't particularly special, just an old full-length mirror, leaning against the wall with a tarnished silver frame. It was the kind of thing you'd find at a thrift store, or in a second-hand shop, but I didn't mind. It fit in with the vibe of the room, and I thought it would be a nice way to check my appearance when I got ready in the morning. The first night I slept in that room, I didn't think anything of the mirror. I was exhausted from the move, so I fell into bed without a second thought. The moonlight from the window cast a soft glow on the room, and the mirror seemed almost comforting standing there beside the bed. But it was the second night that things started to feel off. I woke up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep. My eyes were wide open, my heart racing, though I couldn't remember what had jolted me awake. I looked around the room, disoriented, but everything seemed normal. The faint hum of the streetlights outside filtered through the window, and the room was bathed in the same soft moonlight as before. It was then that I noticed something strange. The mirror, which had been angled at a slight tilt when I'd gone to bed, was now perfectly straight. I could see my reflection clearly in the dim light, but there was something wrong. I blinked, trying to adjust to this strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. The reflection in the mirror didn't look like Minot entirely. It was still my face, my body, but there was something about my eyes, something about the way my reflection was standing. My figure seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, and I could have sworn I saw something Gorasumian Niels standing just behind me. I whipped my head around, but the room was empty, just me alone in the bed. I turned back to the mirror, heart pounding, and the reflection was still there, still looking back at me, but now the shape behind me was clearer. It was a woman. She was just standing there looking directly at me. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She had dark long hair that fell around her shoulders, but her eyes were what struck me the most: empty, hollow eyes that seemed to stare through me, as if she was looking at me but not really seeing me. I couldn't make out the details of her face, but I'd Knew she wasn't me, she was an intruder in my reflection. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing in my chest. I could feel the cold sweat on my skin as I turned on the light, my hands shaking. The room was empty. No woman standing there, no strange reflection. Just the mirror now reflecting my own wide-eyed face. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just some kind of trick of the light or a product of my half-asleep state. But that night was the first in a series of strange occurrences. Over the next few days the woman started appearing more frequently in the mirror at all hours of the night. Sometimes she would stand motionless behind me, other times she would move pacing or looking around as though she were exploring my room. I never saw her move in the room itself. In the reflection, she seemed tethered to the mirror, confined to the space between the glass and my world. But it wasn't just the mirror. The dreams started to every night. Without fail, I would dream of the same woman. She would appear standing just outside my view, always just out of reach, always just beyond the edge of my vision. When I tried to approach her, she would vanish, leaving only an eerie feeling of cold emptiness behind. I became obsessed with the mirror, unable to shake the feeling that it was somehow linked to the woman. I would sit in front of it for hours, staring at my reflection, willing her to appear again. I had to understand what was happening, what this was, but the more I stared, the more dead. I began to notice strange details about the reflection. The woman's movements, though subtle, seemed to grow more pronounced, more deliberate. She was trying to communicate something to me, trying to reach me, and then on the fourth night, she spoke. It was faint at first, just a whisper in the quiet of the room. I hadn't even realized she had spoken until I heard it again, louder this time, the words clear and chilling. You took me from my home. The words sent a shock through me like an electric current, and I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of her gaze in the mirror, her empty eyes watching me, waiting for something. Her expression was no longer distant, but filled with an unbearable sadness. You took me from my home, she repeated, her voice growing stronger with each passing moment. Now you'll help me find it again. I stumbled back from the mirror, my heart hammering in my chest. I knew I wasn't just dreaming anymore. This wasn't just some illusion. Something about this woman, this presence, felt real to real. I tried to leave the apartment, tried to get away from the mirror, but no matter where I went, it was always there. I could feel her following me, lurking at the edges of my vision. Her voice, Katif, would come to me in whispers at night, asking for help, asking me to bring her back to whatever world she had come from. I had to know what she meant. I had to find out where she was from, who she was. So one night, I stood in front of the mirror again, determined to face her, determined to end this. But when I looked at my reflection, I didn't see my own face anymore. It was her face. Her pale, empty eyes, staring back at me, cold and lifeless. And when she spoke, it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was, My voice, my words, help me, I said, as if I were speaking for her. Help me find my home. I didn't understand what had happened, but I knew then the mirror wasn't just a reflection of me. It was a doorway, a portal, and somehow I had opened it. I don't know what she wants. I don't know if I can stop her, but now I can feel her presence in the room with me at all times, her eyes on me, her voice whispering in the dark. I can't escape her, and every time I look in the mirror, I see her there waiting, always waiting. And I know she's not leaving until she gets what she wants, until she finds her home again. I never thought I would be the kind of person who overreacts to small things, I've always prided myself on staying calm, on keeping my head in situations where most people would lose theirs, but that night when I found the claw marks inside the mattress, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. It started a few weeks before when I moved into the apartment. The place wasn't anything special, but it was cheap, quiet, and in a good neighborhood. I was a student just starting my internship, so I didn't need anything fancy. The apartment itself was old though, with creaky floorboards and the smell of dust in the corners. I didn't mind, it felt lived in, like a place I could make my own. The rent was cheap, and I had been on a tight budget. The mattress, however, was a problem. It wasn't new, I'd gotten it secondhand from a thrift store. It had been marked as a vintage mattress, probably some estate sale find, and while it looked fine on the surface, I knew better than to expect much. For the price, it was comfortable enough to sleep on, or so I thought. The first few nights went by without issue. But on the third night, I woke up around 3:00 a.m., drenched in sweat, a strange sense of unease creeping into my chest. I couldn't remember what I had been dreaming, but it was one of those dreams that sticks with you, the kind that makes you feel like something is wrong, even when you're awake. I brushed it off as just a nightmare, but the next night the same thing happened. I woke up at 3:00 a.m. again, heart racing, but this time there was something different. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, like it was pressing against me. The mattress felt unusually warm, almost too warm, as if something had been lying there. Before I got into bed, I checked my phone. Out of the ordinary, but the feeling, that sense of unease, lingered like something unseen was watching me. I couldn't shake it, and as the days passed, I started noticing other things. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my covers tangled around me, but not in a way that made sense. It felt as though something had moved them deliberately. And sometimes when I'd glance at the mattress in the dim light, I'd swear I saw a slight indentation, like souvenir. Something had been sitting on it while I was asleep. Then, one evening, after a particularly strange night where I woke up with a pain in my lower back that I couldn't explain, I decided to check the mattress more thoroughly. I was half tempted to throw it out and get a new one, but something told me to hold off, to at least look at it, before I made a decision. I flipped the mattress over, hoping to see nothing but dust, or a few old stains, but what I found instead made my stomach drop. There were deep claw marks in the fabric. At first I thought it was just some old damage, perhaps from the previous owner's pet, but these weren't scratches. They were gouaches, 4 of them, spaced evenly apart, running across the length of the mattress. The fabric was torn, the edges frayed as if something had dug into it. With incredible force, I ran my fingers along the edges, and the sense of dread I had felt in the past few days grew stronger, gnawing at me. The marks were fresh, they didn't look old at all, they looked recent, and the most unsettling part was that they were deep, too deep to be just from an animal. Whatever had made those marks had claws that could tear through fabric like it was nothing. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the mattress, unable to fully comprehend what I was looking at. The room felt colder now, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in a matter of seconds. I reached for my phone, but my hand was shaking. I wasn't sure who I could even call. I thought about texting my friend Kelly, but I didn't want to sound paranoid, didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. I stood there for a long time, torn between the need to investigate further and the instinct to get out of there, to never sleep in that room again. But curiosity won out. I carefully peeled back the fabric, trying to get a closer look at the damage, to see if there was anything underneath. As I tugged the fabric back, my breath caught in my throat. There was something under the mattress. At first I thought it was a rodent, maybe a rat, or something that had made its way in from the outside, but when I pulled back more of the fabric, I saw what it was. A small wooden box, old, worn, and covered in dust. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't recognize it. I hadn't seen it before. It was small, no bigger than a book, and the wood was dark, nearly black, with strange symbols carved into the sides. The symbols weren't anything I recognized, and they looked ancient, worn down by time, but still legible, as if someone had intentionally carved them into the wood. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the box. The strange markings, I had no idea where it came from, or why it was under my mattress. The logical part of me told me to leave it alone, to get help, to call someone who might know more about this, but another part of me, the part that was curious, wanted to open it. I felt like I needed to open it. I reached for the box, fingers trembling, and as soon as my hand made contact, I felt a jolt of cold, like a shock wave, running through my entire body. I recoiled, my heart hammering in my chest. The box seemed to pulse in my hands, as though it were alive. But I didn't stop. I lifted the box and pried it open. Inside there was nothing but a small scrap of paper folded neatly in half. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it, the edges stiff and cracked with age. The writing on the paper was faint, but it was still legible. It wasn't a language I recognized, but I felt something deep inside me shift as my eyes scanned the characters, and that's when it hit me. The whispers, the sensation of being watched, the strange feeling in the air. It was all connected to the box, to whatever it was that had been left behind. The marks on the mattress, the strange occurrences, the thing that had been living under my bed, it was all tied to this before. I could fully understand what was happening. A noise echoed through the room. Soft at first, like a scratching sound, but then it grew louder. The floorboards creaked, and I could hear something moving, something dragging itself across the floor. I dropped the box, heart racing, and backed away toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew whatever was making the noise was getting closer. The temperature in the room had dropped again, and the shadows seemed to shift around me, coiling and stretching. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, but when I looked at the mattress in the morning, the claw marks were gone. The box too had vanished. Everything was just as it had been before, except I knew deep down that I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever had been under the mattress, whatever had clawed its way into my world, was still there. And I don't know how long I'll be able to outrun it. It started on the first night she moved in. I had just signed the lease for my new apartment. One of those quiet little places tucked away from the chaos of the city. I didn't expect to get a roommate. But when Clara answered my ad, everything seemed to fall into place. She was soft-spoken, polite, a little shy even, but I didn't mind. I liked the peace and the idea of having someone else in the apartment, especially since I was new to the area. She seemed like the perfect fit. I remember the first time I heard it. I had been in my room, trying to wind down after a long day. The apartment was small, but it was cozy, and I was starting to feel at home. I was just about to drift off when I heard it, faint at first, like a distant melody carried on. The wind. I sat up in bed, confused. It was almost like a lullaby, a soft tune I couldn't place. I lay there for a few moments trying to figure out where it was coming from, but then I realized it was coming from Clara's room. I shook my head, thinking it was just some noise from the hallway or the building settling, and eventually I fell asleep. The sound lingered in my mind, but I dismissed it, thinking it was nothing important. The next night I heard it again. This time it was louder, clearer as toe. If it were directly outside my door, the melody wasn't like anything I recognized. It was a sweet, delicate tune that sounded like it came from an old music box. The kind you'd find in a dusty antique store tucked away in some forgotten corner. It was beautiful, haunting even, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I listened carefully, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but it was unmistakable. Light was coming from Clara's room. I waited, wondering if the sound would stop, but it didn't. It continued, soft and melodic, until I found myself almost drawn to it. I stood up, my curiosity getting the better of me, and walked down the hall to her door. When I reached it, I gently knocked, unsure if she had left her music on by accident. I didn't want to disturb her, but the sound was too strange to ignore. When she answered, I was greeted by her tired, gentle face. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Clara smiled faintly, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine. I guess my music box is playing again." I froze. "Music box?" She nodded, stepping aside to let me in. "Yeah, it plays at 303 a.m. every night. I've had it for years. My grandmother gave it to me when I was little. She said it had special properties." Clara's voice trailed off, and she seemed to grow distant for a moment. I wasn't sure how to respond. It was an odd thing to say, but I didn't want to be rude. I looked at the small shelf on her nightstand, and sure enough, there it was, a delicate porcelain music box with intricate engravings, the kind you'd see in a family heirloom display case. It was beautiful, but the way it sat there untouched sent a shiver down my spine. There was something unsettling about the whole thing, fact that it played so regularly at the same time every night. "You said it plays at 303 a.m. every night?" I asked, trying to sound casual though. I could feel my heart rate pick up. Clara nodded. "Yeah, it's always been like this. My grandmother said it had a connection to something. She never explained it, but I've always kept it with me. It's important." I wasn't sure what to say. Clara's tone was sincere, but the whole situation felt so strange, like something out of a storybook. I tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to her quirky attachment to the doll and the music box, but that night when I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stared at the clock. 2:56 a.m. I felt a strange tension in the air. The silence of the apartment felt oppressive, thick, with an unexplainable energy. My mind raced as I thought about the music box and Clara's mention of her grandmother. What kind of connection could it have? Was this some kind of superstition, or something deeper? I found myself wide awake at exactly 303 a.m. I didn't know why, but I had to get up. I couldn't stop the pull, the nagging feeling that something was about to happen. I slid out of bed, walking quietly toward Clara's room. As I passed the hallway, I could already hear the soft notes of the music box drifting through the walls, faint at first, then growing clearer with each step. I knocked on her door again, but this time, there was no answer. I pushed the door open, feeling the cold air from inside wash over me. Clara was lying in bed, but she was completely still, her eyes closed, as if she were sleeping. The music box sat on her nightstand, its lid open. The soft, melodic tune filled the room, but the strange thing was that the melody didn't sound right. It was off. It sounded distant, distorted, like it was coming from another place entirely. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The sound of the music box almost hypnotic now. I moved closer to the bed, staring at Clara's motionless body. Something was wrong. Her breathing was slow to shallow. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but as soon as my hand made contact, her eyes shot open. They were wide, unblinking, and empty. There was nothing in them, just a hollow dark void that sent a chill straight through me. "Clara," I whispered, my voice trembling. Her lips barely moved, but I could hear her voice, soft and distant. "You should stayed away," she murmured, her voice thick with a strange, unearthly quality. "You weren't supposed to hear it." I stepped back, my mind racing. What was happening? Her eyes followed me, unblinking, and the music played on louder, now filling the room with its eerie melody. "Clara, what's happening? Why are you?" The music stopped abruptly, and in the silence that followed I heard something else, a whisper, a low, raspy sound that seemed to come from all around us. From deep within the room itself. "She belongs to us now," the words echoed in my mind, and before I could react, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in on me, the temperature dropping suddenly, and the soft whisper grew louder now. A chorus of voices, all speaking at once. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I felt frozen, like I was being pulled into something far deeper than just a bad dream. Clara's body still lay motionless in the bed, but I knew she wasn't herself anymore. She wasn't the girl I had shared an apartment with, and that music box, it wasn't just a toy, it wasn't just an heirloom. It was something much darker, and it had a hold on Clara. It had a hold on both of us. Now I don't know when I left her room, but when I woke up the next morning, Clara was gone. The apartment was quiet, as though nothing had ever happened. The music box sat on her nightstand, untouched, its lid closed, but when I walked past it, I could swear I heard it, just a faint note playing again, ever so softly. And now every night, at 303 a.m., I wake up to the sound of the music box. It plays louder than before, and each time, I swear, I hear the voices too, whispering, echoing, waiting. I'm not sure what happened to Clara. I don't know if she's gone, or if she's still here, trapped in some dark place between sleep and waking. But I know this, the music box watches me. It waits for me, and whatever is inside it is not letting me go. I never thought much about the painting. It was old, worn, and admittedly a little odd. The moment I saw it at the antique store, something about it drew me in. It wasn't anything spectacular, just a simple portrait of a woman draped in a dark shawl, her face expressionless, but strangely captivating. The artist had captured her features with precision, though there was a dullness to the colors, as if time had weathered the paint. She was standing against a background of dark, swirling clouds, her eyes fixed directly ahead. I had been looking for something to hang above my bed, something that would bring a bit of character to the room, and the painting seemed like the perfect choice. It wasn't until I brought it home that I started noticing something unsettling about it. At first it was small things, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. I would glance at the painting as I walked by, and for just a moment I could have sworn her eyes moved. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my tired mind or a trick of the light. It was an old painting after all. The oils and pigments might have caused some distortion over time. But then it started happening more frequently. One night, as I lay in bed, my eyes wandered up to the painting above me. The room was quiet, the only sound, the soft hum of the air conditioner. I was just drifting off to sleep when something made me blink awake. I stared at the painting, confused. Had I seen what I thought I saw? Her eyes, they moved. I could have sworn they blinked. Not just a slight shift, but a full, deliberate blink. The lids closing slowly, and then opening again, as though she were aware of my gaze. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to race. The painting was still there, hanging innocuously on the wall. The woman's face was as unreadable as ever, her eyes fixed once more, staring into the distance. I felt the tension in my chest, a creeping unease growing with every passing second. but I convinced myself that I had imagined it. I had to have imagined it. It was late, I was exhausted. Still the feeling lingered over the next few days. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps my tired mind playing games with me. But that night, as I lay there once again, the same thing happened. I turned my head toward the painting, and there it was. Egg in her eyes, blinking, slow, deliberate, unnatural. I sat up, heart pounding. This time I wasn't imagining it, I wasn't half asleep. Her eyes blinked at me, and for a brief moment, cat. I thought I saw a shift in her expression, a faint smirk maybe, or a hint of something darker. It was like she knew I was watching, and that thought alone sent a chill down my spine. I tried to distract myself by turning away from the painting, but it felt impossible to escape. The weight of her gaze followed me, even with my back to her. Every time I glanced at the painting, I could swear her eyes were watching me, her lids fluttering slightly, as if there was some life hidden beneath the surface of the canvas. The next morning I moved the painting. I didn't care that it was inconvenient, that it left a mark on the wall. I couldn't stand the idea of it watching me as I slept. I placed it in the hallway away from my bedroom, telling myself that it would be fine. But that night when I tried to sleep, I felt it again. Sensation of eyes on me. I didn't need to look. I could feel it, that same prickling feeling, like someone was staring at the back of my neck. When I finally dared to open my eyes, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the thought that something was wrong. I turned my head slowly, and there it was. The painting back on the wall above my bed. My blood ran cold. How had it gotten there? I hadn't moved it back. I hadn't touched it since I moved it into the hallway, but there it was, hung above my bed once more this time. I wasn't going to wait for it to blink again. I jumped out of bed, rushing to the painting, my hands trembling as I took it down and threw it into the closet. I slammed the door shut, breathing heavily, as if locking it away would somehow stop it from watching me. But I knew deep down that it wasn't the painting itself, it was her, the woman in the painting. She was watching me. The next few nights passed in a haze of restless sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the presence of something watching. It wasn't just the painting anymore, it was the whole room, the walls, the air. Everything felt like it was closing in on me. One morning I woke up to find that the closet door was slightly ajar. I remembered slamming it shut the night before, and yet there it was, wide open. I hesitated before stepping toward it, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look, I didn't want to open that door, but I had to know. I slowly pulled the door open, and to my horror, the painting was no longer inside. It was gone. I looked around the room frantic, but there was no sign of it. My stomach churned. I backed away from the closet, feeling like I was suffocating. The room was eerily quiet. The air seemed thick with something I couldn't place, and then, just as I thought it was over, as if to mock me, I heard a soft click. I froze. I didn't know what it was, but it was followed by another sound, a soft, slow, scratching noise. I followed the sound with my eyes, and there, on the edge of my vision, I saw something move. It wasn't the painting, it was Hearthwoman. She was standing in the corner of my room, staring at me. Her face was just as thin, I remembered, expressionless, but now I could see the faintest flicker in her eyes. The faintest glimmer of recognition. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. She was awake now, and so was I. From that night forward, I could never escape the feeling of her presence. Her gaze never left me. Even when I turned my back to her, I could feel her eyes, always watching, always waiting. The painting, the woman, the ice, there with me, and I think she's waiting for me to sleep so that she can watch me forever. The old chair had been in the corner of my apartment for as long as I could remember. I didn't even remember when it first appeared. It was just always there, a part of the room, a relic from the previous tenant. I assumed the chair was nothing special. A bit worn, its wooden arms faded, and chipped, the cushion faded from years of use. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was one of those chairs you could sink into, letting the worn fabric hug you after a long day. I always had a strange feeling about it, though. It was as if it didn't belong, as if it were out of place, even though it had been in that corner for as long as I'd lived there. I used to think it was just my imagination. I would walk by it sometimes and I'd catch myself hesitating, almost as if the chair were watching me, but of course that was ridiculous. It was just a chair. But then one afternoon, I decided to move it. I was cleaning, reorganizing my living space to make it feel a little more homey, and I thought it would be nice to shift things around. The chair had been in the corner, collecting dust and doing nothing, so I decided to move it. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I simply grabbed the back of the chair and slid it across the hardwood floor, intending to place it near the window for a better view of the street. The moment I touched it, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't physical, it was more of an emotional jolt, like the chair resisted my touch, as if it didn't want to move. I shook it off, told myself I was being silly. I yanked the chair again, dragging it toward the new spot, and then just as I was about to settle it into place, I heard it, a soft creaking sound. It was faint at first, almost like an old floorboard shifting under pressure, but then it grew louder, an unmistakable rocking sound. I looked down, startled, and saw the chair slowly rocking back and forth on its own, as if it were gently swaying in response to some unseen force. It was rocking rhythmically back and forth, like it had a mind of its own. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The chair had been motionless for as long as I could remember, but now it was moving gently, swaying, as if something or someone aways sitting in it. I took a step back, heart racing. My first instinct was to push the chair back to its original spot, to stop whatever this was. I reached out to grab the back of the chair, but the moment my hand touched the wood, the rocking stopped. The silence in the room felt heavier than before. I looked at the chair, now still, and wondered if I had imagined it. It seemed impossible. How could a chair just move on its own? It was nothing more than an old, creaky piece of furniture. But as I stood there staring at it, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the chair, something about the way it had rocked by itself, felt wrong. I quickly finished moving the chair and tried to put the whole incident out of my mind. I told myself I had overreacted, that it was just the floorboards, or maybe a draft in the room. The chair had been there for years after all, and nothing had happened before. There was no reason to be spooked now, but that night the chair started rocking again. I had just finished getting ready for bed, and as I brushed my teeth, I could hear a faint sound of creaking. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but as I stood still, the noise became unmistakable. The same soft, rhythmic rocking from earlier in the day. I hesitated, unsure if I should check it out, but my feet carried me toward the living room before I could think twice. I turned the corner and there it was. The chair rocking gently by itself. In the dim light of the hallway, it was moving slowly back and forth, as though someone were sitting in it, lazily swaying in a comfortable rhythm. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as if the chair had invited some unseen presence into the space. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The thought of sitting down in that chair, of touching it again, made my stomach churn. What if something had been sitting in it? What if it wasn't just a coincidence? I don't know how long I stood there frozen just watching the chair move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The longer I watched, the more I became convinced that the chair wasn't just moving, it was trying to tell me something. It was like it was calling me, beckoning me to sit in it, to feel whatever it was that was lurking beneath the surface. But I didn't want to find out. I rushed to grab the chair, intending to move it back to the corner and away from the center of the room. But just as I touched it, I felt a cold rush of air sweep past me, like a sudden gust of wind. My fingers brushed the seat, and the rocking stopped abruptly. The chair was still again. The silence that followed was suffocating. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak, every groan of the old apartment seemed amplified, and every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that chair waiting for me to give in, to acknowledge it, to sit in it the next day. I didn't even want to be in the same room with the chair. I dragged it to the farthest corner of the apartment, as far away from my bed as I could manage. Cut. I even covered it with a blanket, just to block it out of my sight. It didn't seem to matter though. That night it started rocking again. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal, that the chair was just a chair. Something in my gut told me it was more than that. I could feel it deep in my bones. That thing wasn't just some old piece of furniture. It was alive in some twisted way, connected to something I didn't understand. I tried to leave, to find somewhere else to go, but the feeling followed me. It didn't matter where I went. I knew deep down that it wasn't the chair that was the problem. It was whatever was in the chair. I don't know who or what it is. I don't know what it wants. All I know is that the moment I touch it, the moment I acknowledge it, the rocking starts again and I can't escape it. I hear it when I try to sleep, when I'm trying to focus on something else. It's always there, just behind me waiting. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the faint creaking of that chair rocking slowly, as if inviting me to sit, to stay, but am too scared to listen. Cut. I thought it was sweet at first, a quirky little habit I couldn't quite understand. Clara, my roommate, had always been a little differenting thing. In a bad way, just peculiar. We'd been sharing an apartment for a few months and I quickly got used to her little routines. She was quiet, soft-spoken, a little introverted, but we got along well enough. I didn't mind the silence. It was the kind of calm I needed after my busy days at work, but it was the flowers under her pillow that caught my attention. It started on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Clara had been unusually quiet, sitting on the couch with her usual cup of tea, eyes glued to her phone. I was doing laundry in the other room when I noticed her walking into her bedroom. She had a small bunch of flowers in her hand, just a few daisies, the kind you might pick from a field, bright and simple, not anything extravagant. I didn't think much of it. She'd always liked flowers. Sometimes she'd bring them back from the market, and they'd sit on her windowsill for a few days before wilting. Nothing out of the ordinary. That evening, after I'd finished my chores, I walked by her room on my way to the kitchen. Her door was slightly ajar, and I caught a glimpse of her lying in bed. She was facing the wall, a small bouquet of flowers tucked neatly under her pillow. The faint scent of the daisies lingered in the air, and I thought it was a bit odd, but again, I didn't question it. It was just Clara being Clara. But then the next morning, something strange happened. I was up early making coffee in the kitchen when Clara walked in, her expression slightly off. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. I asked if everything was okay, but she just nodded, giving me one of her usual soft smiles. I noticed the flowers. The daisies, once fresh and bright, were wilting, their petals were drooping, their color fading from a bright white to a dull, lifeless grayish hue. It wasn't just a small change, either they were dead, their onseverbrant stems now limp and dry. I didn't think anything of it at first. Flowers wilt right. Maybe they hadn't been fresh enough, or maybe Clara had kept them under her pillow for too long. I didn't say anything to her, but I couldn't shake the image of the withered flowers out of my mind. The next night she did it again. She placed another bouquet of fresh daisies under her pillow before bed. I noticed it, of course, but I didn't say anything. I just figured it was one of her little rituals. People do strange things when they're alone, right? But the following morning, I saw the same thing. The flowers were wilted, completely lifeless, the petals shriveled up like they had been left out in the sun for days. The stark contrast between the fresh bouquet and the wilted remains struck me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Clara, do you keep flowers under your pillow every night? I asked, gently, feeling the weight of my curiosity getting the better of me. She smiled at me, but it wasn't quite the same smile. It was strained, like she was hiding something, but she didn't seem angry or defensive. Yeah, she said, her voice quiet. I like the smell of them when I sleep. I don't know why, but I feel comforted by them. I nodded, but I didn't press her further. It seemed harmless enough. But I still felt uneasy. It wasn't the flowers themselves. Was the way they always seemed to wilt overnight, no matter how fresh they were. There was something wrong about it, like time was moving differently in her room, or maybe her connection to the flowers wasn't as innocent as it appeared that night. I couldn't sleep well. My mind kept racing, trying to find a rational explanation for the flowers, but I couldn't come up with anything. Maybe she had some strange connection to them, something personal. I thought maybe it was a memory from her past, something comforting she clung to. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling the whole thing felt. I woke up in the middle of the night to the faint smell of flowers again, that familiar scent filling the room. I glanced at the clock. It was around 3 a.m., I told myself. I was just imagining it, but the smell lingered in the air, thick and almost too sweet. I turned over facing the wall, trying to fall back to sleep, but something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the air felt heavier somehow. It felt as though something or someone was in the room with me watching. I tried to shake off the feeling, and closed my eyes again, but when I opened them just a few minutes later, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The flowers under Clara's pillow were moving. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there was no mistaking it. The petals were twitching ever so slightly, as though they were alive again. The air around the bed seemed to shimmer, as though the flowers themselves were pulling some invisible force from the room, bending reality in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining it. But when I opened them again, the flowers were still moving. The petals unfurled slightly, as if they were growing in reverse, returning to their fresh, vibrant state. I couldn't breathe. I could hear the soft creak of the floorboards as Clara shifted in bed, her body still like she was lost in some dream. The flowers, once wilted and lifeless, now seemed to pulse with energy, as if they were drawing something from her. From the air, from the night itself, I could feel my pulse quicken. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to wake Clara to ask her what was going on, but something told me not to. It was as if the flowers, whatever they were, didn't want me to disturb the process. I didn't dare move from my bed. The air was thick with something I couldn't care Explain. When I finally gathered enough courage to close my eyes again, I tried to ignore the sounds of the flowers rustling in the dark. I told myself I was just imagining things, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but when I woke up, the next morning the flowers were gone completely. Not a trace of them was left, not even the slightest petal. It was like they had never been there at all. But I wasn't convinced when I checked Clara's room that morning. The bed was perfectly made, her pillow untouched. There was no sign of the flowers, nothing. It was like the whole thing had been a figment of my imagination still. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. The next night, I decided to stay up a little later, watching, waiting, hoping to see something, anything that could explain the strange events. I stayed in my bed, my eyes glued to the clock. The minutes ticked. By 2:45, 300 a.m. Until I finally heard the sound of Clara's breathing slowing, deepening as she drifted off to sleep. And then it began again, the faint rustling, the smell of flowers. I watched, wide-eyed, my breath caught in my throat as I saw the flowers begin to appear once more, at this time a little more quickly than before. They appeared in the dark beneath Clara's pillow, blooming like they were returning from the dead, fresh and vibrant once again. I realized then with a sinking feeling that whatever it was, whatever Clara was doing, she wasn't just sleeping with the flowers, she was feeding them, and whatever they weren't just plants. They were something much older, something that had been waiting for the right moment to grow, and I was beginning to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake by moving in with her. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if Clara knows what's going on, if she's aware of the dark growing force beneath her pillow, but every night the flowers bloom again, and every night I hear them rustling in the dark. I'm scared to stay here, but am even more terrified to leave, because I think whatever she's feeding, whatever she's been growing, is finally ready to take what it's been waiting for, and soon it might come for me too. It started the night I moved into the apartment, or maybe it had started long before that. I don't know for sure anymore. The apartment was old, a little run down, but it was affordable, and that's all that mattered at the time. The landlord had mentioned that the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, but I didn't think much of it. People move all the time, right? It's a big city, and everyone has their reasons. The first thing I noticed about the apartment was the lamp. It was in the living room of a piece that stood on a small table by the window. The lampshade was a faded off-white fabric, and the base was an intricate design of twisted metal, dark with age. It had a kind of beauty to it, the kind of beauty that's easy to overlook, the kind of thing you might find at an estate sale or tucked away in a forgotten corner of a thrift shop. At first the lamp was just a part of the room, a soft ambient light that warmed the space during the evening, casting a gentle glow that made the place feel more homey. I didn't think much of it, but there was something odd about the way the light flickered. Sometimes it wasn't a normal flicker, like the bulb was going out or the wiring was loose. No, this flicker seemed almost deliberate. It only happened when I was sitting quietly, maybe reading or thinking. Every time I thought about her, the woman I hadn't seen in months, light would flicker. It didn't make sense. I thought it was a coincidence at first, but the more it happened, the more I began to pay attention. It wasn't just random. The flickering only occurred when I let my mind wander, when I thought about her, about how we'd met, how we'd spent so many nights talking, laughing, planning for the future. How I'd watched her change in ways I couldn't understand, watched her pull away from me, bit by bit, how she had left without a word, without a trace. The lamp flickered again that night, just as I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her. The thought of her always seemed to settle in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake, and every time I thought about her, I would feel a strange coldness creep into the room. The lamp blinked once, twice, as if it were responding to my thoughts, and I reached over to turn it off, but it flickered, again softly. At first, then more violently. I sat up in bed, staring at the lamp, confused. That's when it happened. The light went out, completely plunging the room into darkness. For a second, I thought the bulb had burned out, but then I noticed something strange. The light wasn't just off, it was as if the lamp had vanished, not in the sense that it wasn't there, but that it had somehow stopped existing in this space, as if the flickering light had peeled back the fabric of the room, leaving a void behind. I got up, my feet heavy on the cold floor, and walked over to the lamp. I flicked the switch again, but nothing happened. The room remained dark. A chill ran up my spine, but I pushed it aside. I needed to focus, needed to stay calm. This was just a glitch. I pulled the lamp's plug from the socket and checked the bulb, but it was perfectly fine, still warm to the touch. It made no sense. I grabbed a new bulb from my drawer and screwed it in, but when I turned the switch, nothing happened. The lamp was dead, completely lifeless. I stood there in the silence for a long time, unsure of what to do. The air in the room felt thicker now, heavier, like it was filled with something. I couldn't see, my thoughts were racing, I couldn't understand what was happening. I turned around and walked back to my bed, but the moment I closed my eyes, the light flickered again, and this time, it wasn't a flicker. It was more like a flash, like something was trying to break through the darkness. I shot up from the bed, heart racing, and turned to face the lamp. There in the corner of my vision, I saw something, or someone. It was her. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a memory playing out in my mind, but the more I stared, the more it became clear. It, standing in the corner of the room just beyond the light. Her face was blurred at first, her features indistinct, but I could feel her presence, her gaze. I could feel her watching me. I tried to speak, to say something, but no words came out. My mouth was dry, the air around me grew colder, and I could feel her in the room, not physically but as a presence seen. But felt the lamp flickered once more, but this time it stayed lit, a steady glow illuminating her figure. She was standing just out of reach, as if waiting for something. I reached out my hand, trembling, but the moment my fingers brushed the lamp's base, she vanished, not in a dramatic, supernatural way, but as if she had melted into the shadows. The room went cold and the flickering stopped. I stood there, frozen, my mind reeling. I couldn't explain what had just happened. The lamp was on again, the light steady, but everything about the room felt different. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like I was no longer in control. I wanted to turn the light off again, but something stopped me. I couldn't look away from the lamp, and then the whispers began. They were soft at first, almost imperceptible, like the sound of wind brushing against the windows, but as I stood there watching the light flicker in time with the whispers, the words began to form in my mind. You didn't forget me, I never left you, wanted to forget me, but you never could. I couldn't tell if I was hearing it in my mind, or if it was coming from the lamp itself. But I knew one thing for certain, she wasn't gone. She had never been gone. The lamp flickered again. I saw her face clearer now, emerging from the soft glow of the light, her eyes fixed on me. She wasn't just a memory, she was here. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The lamp flickered and I felt her presence growing stronger, more real with every passing second. I could feel her breath cold and close, whispering into my ear. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, watching her, feeling the weight of her gaze, but eventually the light went out again. Now every night the lamp flickers when I think about her, and it's never the same. It's like she's trying to break through, trying to reach me. I can feel her presence in the room even when I'm alone. I can feel her watching me, waiting for me, and every time I close my eyes I hear the whispers. You didn't forget me, I never left, I don't know how much longer I can take it before she finally steps out from the shadows and takes me with her. I never considered myself the superstitious type. I've always been the kind of person who's logical, rational, practical. I don't put much stock into ghosts, spirits, or anything that might be considered paranormal. So when I found my name carved into the wooden headboard of my bed, I tried to chalk it up to something reasonable. Maybe it was an accident, maybe the previous tenant did it. Maybe the wood had some kind of natural imperfection, but deep down I knew that wasn't the truth, and something inside me shifted that night, something I can't explain. It started on a quiet Wednesday evening. I had moved into this apartment only a few months prior, a small one-bedroom place on the second floor of an old building. The rent was cheap, and the location was perfect. Clothes to work, quiet, and not far from my friends. It seemed like the perfect spot for me to settle into. And for the first few weeks it was. The apartment was old, with creaky floors and the musty scent of age, but it had character. I didn't mind the kind of space that feels lived in, lived through. It had a charm, a warmth. I liked it. The bed, however, was a different story. It wasn't anything fancy, just a second-hand frame I'd found on Craigslist. It was solid, sturdy, and had this beautiful, carved wooden headboard with intricate patterns along the top. When I first saw it, I thought it had character. I liked the aged feel to it. It was a little worn, but I liked that. I figured it gave the room a bit of a vintage touch. I didn't pay too much attention to the carvings at first. They just looked like old decorative marks, but that night, it caught my eye. I woke up around 3:00 a.m., feeling restless. I don't know why. I woke up at that exact time, but it's like something just pulled me from sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, trying to shake off the unease that crept into my thoughts. It was just one of those nights. I guess I couldn't get comfortable, so I decided to sit up and adjust my pillows. That's when I saw it. The light from the street outside filtered through the window, casting faint shadows on the wall. The moonlight hit the headboard just right, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. My Namami full name was carved into the wood. The letters were rough, uneven, as if they had been hastily scratched into the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking I was still half asleep. But no, the name was there. My name, clear as day. I got out of bed, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. The carvings were deep, like they had been made recently, the edges still fresh, like the wood had been gouged just hours before. I leaned in closer, running my fingers over the letters, feeling the roughness of the wood beneath my fingertips. But how could this be? I had never seen those markings before. I was sure they weren't there when I moved in. I stood there for a while, just staring at the headboard, trying to convince myself it was some kind of weird coincidence. Maybe it was part of the design, maybe the previous tenant had done it, though I didn't remember noticing anything like that when I first saw the bed. But even so, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just that my name was carved into the wood, it was the feeling I got when I saw it, like the air had thickened in the room, like I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or something had done it, but why my name, and why now? I didn't sleep much that night. I kept my eyes on the headboard, too afraid to close them. My mind racing through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. The name stayed etched into the wood, cold and unfeeling. The next day I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just a weird coincidence. I told myself I was just imagining things, that the carvings must have been there when I moved in, and that I hadn't noticed them until now. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the unease. It nagged at me like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. I told myself I'd get used to it. I would. It was just a name carved into a piece of wood, nothing to be afraid of, right? But every night when I tried to sleep, the feeling of being watched crept in again. The room felt colder, and the headboard name seemed to loom over me, as if it were waiting for me to notice something, to remember something. It was a week later when I found out the truth. I was cleaning the apartment, something I usually put off until I had no choice, when I noticed a small envelope wedged between the frame of the bed and the wall. It was yellowed, brittle with age, and there was no return address. It wasn't sealed, but I felt an odd hesitation before I opened it, as if I was being warned not to. Inside the envelope was a piece of paper, aged and folded. I unfolded it carefully, my fingers trembling. The words on the paper were written in faded ink, shaky, like someone had written them in a hurry. It was a list of names that meant nothing to me until I got to the last one, my name, and beneath it, in a hasty, frantic scrawl, "It's not just your name anymore, it's calling you, you're the next one." I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. My eyes went back to the headboard carving, and the room felt suffocating. It was as if the walls were closing in, as if the air itself was thickening around me, the weight of something pressing down on me. The apartment felt different now too. It wasn't just the headboard, or the name carved into it. It was the presence. I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt like something was watching me from the corner of the room, waiting for me to fall asleep. That night I tried to leave. I grabbed my things, my bag, my keys, my jacket, When I opened the door to leave, I found myself standing back in the bedroom, staring at the headboard again. The name, my name. I didn't know how I got there. I couldn't explain it. But the door wouldn't open, the room wouldn't let me leave. I finally got the courage to take the headboard down, to try and get rid of the thing, whatever it was that was connected to it. But as soon as I touched the frame, the wood groaned, and the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the silence louder, until I couldn't stand it anymore. And then I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, but growing louder, clearer, a voice whispering my name. I tried to scream, to run, but the room held me captive. The whisper turned to a chant, the name repeating over and over until it was all I could hear. It wasn't just a name, it was a call to me. I never left, I couldn't, and now every night I can hear it calling my name, in that same place, in the same room, and I know deep down that whatever it was that carved my name into the wood, it's waiting for me, and soon I'll have no choice but to answer. It's only a matter of time. When I first moved in, I thought Clara was a bit odd, but I never imagined the extent of her peculiarities. We'd been friends for years, but sharing an apartment was new territory for both of us. Her quirks, which I had always found endearing before, suddenly started to feel a little unsettling. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but something was off. It was like living with a stranger who had been disguised as my best friend. But I didn't want to overthink it, we were both adjusting to this new chapter, right? So I shrugged it off and convinced myself that the transition was bound to be a little bumpy. The first strange thing was the mirrors. Clara was obsessed with them every night. Before bed, without fail, she would cover every mirror in the apartment. She would pull a sheet or cloth from her closet drape it carefully over each one, and step back, as if checking to ensure not a single corner was left exposed. It was an odd ritual, but I never questioned it. I figured it was just some weird habit of hers, maybe she'd read somewhere that mirrors were bad luck, or that they disturbed the energy in a room, who knows. The thing was, Clara was a smart, reasonable person. She didn't believe in superstitions or anything like that. We'd spent countless hours talking about everything from philosophy to politics, but she'd never once mentioned anything about being afraid of mirrors. One evening while she was out, I decided to skip my usual routine and leave the mirror in the hallway uncovered. There was no harm in it, right? I had nothing to fear. I wanted to see if anything unusual happened, if Clara's habit was just a quirk, or if there was something more to it. That night, I went to bed late, reading for a while before turning off the lamp. I couldn't sleep right away as usual, so I lay there staring at the ceiling, letting my mind wander. The room was dark, except for the faint sliver of light from the street lamp outside that filtered through the curtain. My gaze drifted, as it often did, to the uncovered mirror in the hallway. At first, it seemed normal. The mirror reflected the dim light from the street, the soft edges of the room barely visible, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, something shifted. The reflection moved. I wasn't sure if I had just imagined it, but I saw a shadow pass through the mirror, moving quickly, too quickly. I sat up in bed, blinking, trying to shake off the grogginess that still clung to me, but when I looked again, the shadow was gone. Cold. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a car passing by outside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay back down, forcing myself to relax, telling myself it was nothing. Then the air in the room grew thick. It felt heavier, almost suffocating. I tried to turn over, but I couldn't. It was like an invisible weight was pressing down on my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the growing sense of dread that was crawling up my spine, but when I opened them again, the reflection in the mirror had changed. At first, it was just the faintest hint of movement, something just beyond my reach. A figure, blurry at first, then clearer. It was a woman. She was standing in the hallway just outside the frame of the mirror, her back to me, her head slightly tilted forward. She was tall, her dark hair cascading down her back, her figure slender and unmoving. I blinked, my breath caught in my throat. The woman was wearing a long white dress, her hands hanging at her sides, almost unnaturally still, and for the first time since moving in, I felt the unmistakable presence of someone else in the room with me. I could feel her, even though she wasn't in the room. I could feel her watching me. I tried to speak, to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, and I couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. The woman's reflection was still, her head slowly turning toward me. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, but there was no expression on her face. She just looked at me, her gaze empty, as if she were waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, and I suddenly understood why Clara covered the mirrors. It wasn't superstition, it wasn't some strange habit she was trying to keep whatever that thing was from seeing her, from coming into the room. I don't know how long I lay there frozen, but eventually the woman in the mirror moved. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and reached toward the glass. Her fingers pressed against it, and the surface of the mirror rippled, like water distorting her reflection. I gasped, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went still. Again the mirror was normal once more, the reflection of the room clear and undisturbed. The woman was gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. The next morning, Clara returned to the apartment her usual calm self. She made her way into the kitchen to make breakfast, and I followed her, unable to stop myself from asking, "Clara, why do you cover the mirrors?" Every night. She didn't look at me right away. She just stirred the coffee in her mug, her hands steady and deliberate. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, like she was choosing her words carefully. "You saw her, didn't you?" Clara's eyes met. Trit. Mine, and I saw a flicker of something, fear maybe, or recognition in them. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. "The woman in the mirror," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been following me for years. She's not relat, least not in the way we think. But if you look long enough, if you stare too hard, she starts to reach out, and if she reaches you, if she touches you." I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew. "You have to cover the mirrors every night," she said, as if I didn't can't understand. "She's waiting for you to look." I felt my stomach twist. I thought about the woman's reflection, her cold, empty gaze staring into mine, waiting for me to notice her. And that night, when I went to bed, I knew I had made a mistake. I didn't cover the mirror. I had to see her again. I had to understand. The lamp flickered beside my bed. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't look away. I saw her again. She was standing in the hallway, her eyes wide and empty, her hand raised against the glass, ready to press through, and this time, I couldn't look away. She was waiting for me, and I knew, deep down, that I had crossed the line. Now every night, she's there, always watching, always waiting for me to break the silence, to finally let her in. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the soft rustling of her dress as she steps closer. I never thought much about the apartment when I first moved in. It was small, older, but affordable. The rent was low, and I was on a tight budget, so it felt like the perfect place. I found it on a whim, really. I needed somewhere fast after a particularly messy breakup, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could just be alone for a while. The first few nights went by without incident. The apartment was empty, save for the bare essentials. I had brought with me a bed, a desk, a few chairs, a couple of lamps. It wasn't much, but it felt comfortable enough. I didn't mind the creaky floors or the soft hum of the radiator. It was quiet, peaceful. But then on the fifth night, I woke up to something that would change everything. I had fallen asleep like any other night. Exhausted from work, my mind still buzzing from the things I had to do the next day. But around 2:00 a.m., I was jolted awake. I couldn't remember the dream I'd been having, but I had the distinct feeling that I had been woken by something. I couldn't quite place it, but it was a sharp sensation, like a shift in the air around me. When I opened my eyes, I immediately noticed something strange. The bedsheet, which had been pristine when I went to sleep, was covered in a dark stain, a large blotch in the middle of the bed. At first I thought I might have scratched myself, or perhaps spilled something in my sleep, but when I sat up and reached for the sheet, I froze. There was no pain, no injury. I wasn't bleeding. The stain wasn't bloodied, was darker, almost black, in the dim light, like ink, but with a texture that didn't feel quite right. It was splotchy, uneven, almost like a spill that had soaked into the fabric. but there was no sign of any liquid on my skin. Nothing on my hands. I stared at the stain, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't make sense. How could something so dark appear so suddenly? I felt a sense of unease creep through me, like something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to explain it. I stood up, pulling the sheet back to get a better look. The stain stretched across the bed, slowly soaking deeper into the fabric as if it were alive. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. I turned on the light and inspected the bed, but there was no obvious source for the stain. I looked under the mattress, around the sides of the bed. Nothing, no sign of any liquid, no explanation. I was starting to feel a little frantic, the weight of the situation pressing on me. I grabbed my phone, texted my friend asking if they thought I might be imagining things, if there was some logical explanation for it, but they didn't respond, so I did what anyone would do. Stripped the bed and tossed the sheet in the laundry, hoping that the stain would somehow disappear, that I would wake up in the morning and this would all make sense, that this weird feeling in my gut would subside, but it didn't. The next night, I was too nervous to fall asleep. My mind kept replaying the incident over and over, the stain, the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more real it felt. Around the same time as the night before, 200 AME woke up again, this time with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I didn't want to look, didn't want to face whatever was happening, but when I finally turned on the light and looked at the bed, my heart stopped. The stain was back, but this time it was worse. It was larger, darker, the edges more jagged. The black ink-like blotch had spread further across the sheet, creeping toward the edge of the bed, and again there was no sign of blood, no injury. I hadn't been bleeding, I wasn't injured. I checked my body, frantic now, feeling for any cuts or abrasions. Nothing. I felt perfectly fine. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't explain it. There was no rational explanation. I needed to get out of that room, away from the bed, away from whatever was happening. But the moment I stepped out of the room, I felt something pull at me, a strange cold sensation at the back of my neck, like something was watching me. I ran back to the bed and grabbed the sheet, ready to rip it off the mattress, but when I pulled it away, I saw something else. The mattress wasn't just stained. There were small, deep scratches along the surface, long, jagged marks that seemed to cut through the fabric as if something or someone had been digging into it. The scratches weren't random, they were arranged in a pattern, as if something had traced its way across the mattress, deliberate and slow. I couldn't look at it anymore. I didn't know what to think. My mind raced, spinning through every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I wasn't bleeding, I hadn't scratched the mattress myself, I had been sleeping, and the most unsettling part, the scratches looked fresh, new, like they had appeared within the past few hours. The next day, I decided I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I grabbed my things, moved to the living room, and tried to sleep on the couch. I didn't know what had happened, I didn't know what was happening to me, but I couldn't stay in that bed, not with the stain, not with the scratches, not with the feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface of reality, waiting. But when I woke up the next morning, the bed was made. The mattress was pristine again, and there was no sign of the stain or the scratches. It was as if nothing had ever happened, as if I had imagined it all. But I knew I hadn't. The next night, I tried to go back to my room to sleep in my bed again. I convinced myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was stress, maybe it was the old bed. But as soon as I lay down, I felt its same weight, the same cold presence in the room, and then just before I closed my eyes, I heard Ita's faint scratching sound coming from beneath the bed. I wasn't imagining it, the scratches were real, and whatever had made them wasn't finished with me yet.